My name is Camilla Fayed and I am the founder of Pharmacy Restaurant and Farm in Notting Hill. We really focus on farm to table. We're a whole food, plant-based restaurant, just trying to really focus on whole food nutrition and connect the dots between your farmer and your chef.
You said at the start there it's a restaurant, but also a farm. That feels very unique. Tell me a little bit more about that.
What we really do is focus on the importance of farming. And I think, again, with restaurants, and especially mainstream restaurants in central London, there's very little focus on provenance. And I think, with pharmacy, it's always been the heart and soul of what we do is understanding where your food comes from, how it's grown, what soil quality looks like, and really, educating chefs about just the simple notion of farming and, how important that is in our food system, and actually how removed and disconnected chefs are, specifically in my experience, from that process. And we really love to say that, chefs are the messenger for the gospel of the soil, because they really are. They are the closest thing that we have to food, and especially in hospitality. I think that there's a huge gap in knowledge and understanding of how food is grown.
I mean, I relate to that on a deep level, and I'm sure many people do, right? Like, I grew up in a city, still live in one of the biggest cities in the world, and I love food, I love plant-based food, but I'm still very disconnected with where it comes from, and I think we all are, right? It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So I'm curious, what perspective has that given you, like owning a restaurant and a farm? And you're seeing that entire process, I imagine, from like growing the produce to picking it, delivering it to the restaurant, cooking it, serving it to a customer, and it being eaten. Did you have prior experience? Did you grow up farming? What's your background when it comes to that?
Well, I think for me, it was very new. It's my first restaurant, and 8 years ago, we started planning. My family is in hospitality, so I suppose I have that in my bones and in my blood. So I'm used to the service industry in such, but it's really my first venture into my own hospitality business. So no prior understanding, really, apart from just it being inbred in me. And again, farming, I'm lucky enough to have grown up in the English countryside. So again, just a taste of nature has been very much intertwined in my being, but no prior knowledge to farming. What I really understood, lucky enough to travel the world, spend a lot of time in California and from Thailand to, all over the world, and really understand that their connection to food and the cultural connection to food is really strong. Even my own background, my mother's from Finland, my father's Egyptian. I'm lucky enough to have absorbed the culture of food. And when it came to being in the UK, there wasn't that understanding. So I thought, wow, there's a real gap here. And that's really where I thought, look, I'm going to create a new model, a new system for food in the industry, because it just didn't exist. There's some brilliant chefs out there. There's some fantastic restaurants, again, but they're either very niche or very expensive. And it kind of just hits the very small percentage of people that can get access to that food. So I really wanted to burst the bubble, people accessing and understanding really where their food came from.
And so you talk there about the need for a new model, a new system. Tell me a little bit about what's unique about what you do.
Well, I think just the connection between ecology and agriculture, and that being the most fundamental part of human health. And again, just joining the dots for people, looking back at, the industrial chemical industry that has been, such a big part of the way we eat. And that for me has just been the most shocking part of all my research with this restaurant, is because we have these two different food systems. There's the organic food system, and then there's a conventional food system. I actually don't call it conventional farming, I call it chemical farming, because again, we need to retrain ourselves in terms of the wording of actually what's happening. It is not conventional the way we've been farming. It's totally toxic and poisonous to human health. And I just thought to myself, why do we have these two different systems? So again, just trying to connect the dots for people with having food without any chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, heavy metals sprayed on our food should be ultimately a human right. Very, very important part of my work is just bringing that up to the surface. And I think I do that, really mostly with the chefs. And the chefs, again, are really our messengers of this movement.
Here at Earthrise, we talk a lot about the environmental and ecological crisis that we're in, and we're all very aware of that. And I think many of us feel sort of overwhelmed and probably fed up with that information. But we rarely link it with the state of human health. And I was talking to someone the other day, and we were talking about the fact that like we grew up in a time of like a culture of progress and idealism of like things are always going to be better in the future, and hey, yeah, maybe we're damaging the environment, but like people are healthier than before, they're living longer than before. And so it was almost like environmental degradation in the interest of like human health. But actually what we understand now is not only is the environment unhealthy, but like humans are more unhealthy than ever before, right? And so it's like, who is the system benefiting? So I wonder if you can help me draw those links between why, you know, this way of doing business or like running a restaurant is not only good for human health, but also for the environment.
So I think one of my favourite books that really kind of got my interest in this subject was Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. That, for me, was one of the most aha moments in, you know, researching in my own journey. And I think, you know, she was the real protagonist of understanding chemical farming and how we started this process. Looking at the, you know, First World War, the industrial chemical complex, they started using chemicals from the war into farming. And they realized that there was a link between these, you know, chemical compounds and fertilizers. So from World War One, which is actually, it's not that long ago, we have started putting these chemicals in the soil. And before World War One, we only ever had organic agriculture. Yes, we've destroyed so much of soil health, and, you know, the industrial food industry has destroyed human health, but ultimately it's not that long a, you know, lifespan that we've actually been doing this. So I do believe that there is so much more information now. You know, Rachel Carson was a drop in the ocean back then. I think now, you know, with the likes of what you're doing, the movement in general around what's happening has really kind of advanced us into understanding that what we've been doing to the soil has been devastating. And I think now we can turn time back with, you know, the likes of permaculture, regen agriculture, biodynamics. I mean, there's just so many ways that we can kind of create a better food system, and a better food system is ultimately a healthier humanity. I feel that there's real hope. I mean, only the past 7 years since I've been working on pharmacy, I've seen such a huge jump and trend and interest and awareness into this subject. So I am super hopeful that, you know, things will change.
It does feel that over the last few years, the conversation around farming, agriculture and soil health, which you've just mentioned there, has massively exploded. Like, I don't think it was a conversation that was being had before, and, you know, the environmental impact of farming and the need to transform that system. Can you tell me just a little bit why soil health is so important?
You know, for me, it's quite a simple understanding that the microorganisms in soil are the almost identical replica to the microorganisms in our gut. And I think gut health is, again, a new phenomenon, which is, I find interesting. It's only really the past 10 years that mainstream medicine has been focusing on gut health. Look at our lovely friend, Zach Bush. He's a real purveyor of this message. Zach really ties the links between the degradation of soil, monocropping, industrial chemicals, glyphosate, genetically modified organisms, all of this kind of, I like to call it anti-human. It's an anti-human movement. It's against humanity. All of these issues have been one of the main contributing factors to, you know, humanity being so sick. And I think the reason why humanity is so sick is because they have such depleted gut health. And why do they have such depleted gut health is because you have to look at the depletion of the soil. So they just mirror each other. And I think, you know, the more and more we can understand that, the better idea we have about our own health. The more and more we talk about gut health, the more and more we talk about soil health and biodiversity, and then you talk about climate change. So really everything has links. And I think what we're starting to do now is just link those things together.
Yeah, it definitely does feel that the climate space is very fixated on the idea of carbon and the way that impacts the climate, but less so the ecological and environmental and biodiversity crisis that very much accompanies the climate crisis, and is sort of totally interlinked but also completely separate. Like, burning less carbon might reduce greenhouse gases, but it's not changing the way that we farm and the way that impacts nature and animals and the ecosystems that we so desperately rely on. You've painted this really vivid picture of the sort of traditional farming industry that is like relying heavily on chemicals and is degrading not only our environment but also human health. Where do we go from here? Like, what does an alternative food system look like? What are the obstacles to making that a huge scaled out thing?
I think it's a matrix of solutions, big and small. I definitely feel that, for sure, a radical reduction in chemical farming is number one on my list. That is really targeting massive policy interventions and really big governmental change. Things that I feel are really overwhelming for people just like myself or yourself to start doing, but on a small scale. I think really just empowering education, again, just re-educating people on the importance of farming and, food systems, and empowering even home growers, allotments. I mean, one of my favorite ideas is, changing the parks. We look at London, look at Hyde Park, Regent's Park. We're so blessed with all this beautiful land around us, but it's just lawn. What is it there for? Why can't we, start, miles and miles long of allotments to feed people, not only for pleasure, but also environmental health, and coming up with creative ideas to change the food system, big and small, is really the way forward. And definitely education. I try my bit with the chefs and in the industry, but, we need to go down back to school. There's a zero understanding of how we grow our food at school.
I always think if I ever get like the train out of London, and quite quickly you're passing sort of green fields on either side. And like I grew up thinking, oh, that's nature. That's what nature looks like, and now like having had the education I've had, I look at it and I think, no, that's dead. Like that's a monoculture. Those are just like, it's just grass, or it's one crop planted over and over. There's no diversity. There's no wildlife. These once looked like, abundant rainforest complex ecosystems, and that is nature. And so it's like, our image of what the wild is needs to be kind of transformed, I think. I mean, I recently discovered there are rainforests in the UK. I went to visit one in Scotland. It was just magnificent, and waterfalls. I didn't know that we had that in this country. I'm seeing this vision, and I guess one element of it I was curious about is like the importance of localism in your mind. I was reading about how, a lot of your food is grown in Kent, which is here in the UK, and it's delivered, I read, by electric vehicle to your restaurant, which is this lovely notion. And I wonder how important is that, like in your vision for a future food industry? Do we need to think more about localism, growing food nearby to the restaurants, and having kind of lots of smaller scale farms as opposed to these massive like agriculture businesses that ship globally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a massive moment for our awareness was in COVID. And I think, the importance of having our own local, food system and supply chains. It's no longer a hippie movement to be part of a farm. It's now a survival movement. And I think that, COVID showed the fragility of our food systems. And I think that's really been the past only few years. But I know that there are some wonderful farming communities in the UK, and I think that they feel more empowered now because of what's happened in COVID and because of the supply chain crisis. People are almost all of a sudden on a really, I suppose it's almost like it feels like an apocalypse movement sometimes, because people are just wanting to grow more than ever, buying land. You see these communities popping up everywhere, rapidly. And even for pharmacy, I think, during COVID, the luxury of having our own farm and our own food supply. We were, I would say, a handful of hospitality businesses that were actually able to thrive in COVID. We were doing lots of initiatives with food boxes, how to grow. We were really empowering people to kind of realize the importance of, localization and local food, food supplies.
So that's interesting, isn't it? It's like not only are these local regenerative food systems better for our health, better for the environment, but there's a great sense of resilience is what you're touching on there.
Yes.
And that was really sort of tested throughout the pandemic. And as we head, as you're saying, into these uncertain times where we're experiencing kind of global shocks in our big, global systems, and the food system is one of them that's often described at a real tipping point in a very precarious position. Enhancing that kind of local network of food systems is just a way to build resilience. You mentioned there that it's a real luxury, and I guess that's a key thing to pick up on. Organic food and like having your own land and growing food is in many ways a huge luxury, and for many people is unobtainable because land can be expensive, and organically grown vegetables are more expensive than conventional, and I'm putting that in quotation marks.
Yeah.
How do we make this movement more accessible? Is that something you think about when it comes to pharmacy?
It's actually at the forefront of why and how I created my business. All I've tried to do is create a perception change. And I think if we do empower people with the perception that this is a fundamental human right to have food free of all these chemicals, it is first educating people, and then, making them understand that this is, health is wealth. Ultimately, we know that. And again, the fragility of COVID has really really kind of propelled our need and want for, cleaner food, better, healthier take on understanding food. And I think, how we farm, how we cook, and how we eat is, it kind of determines humanity's destiny. So again, it's about shifting perception. And I think I do that within my own circles. I grew up in the cathedral of consumerism, I suppose. And I've slowly moved away. And again, that's only because of my own perception has changed on, my own health. And I've been faced with really bad health. I like to say that my health failures were the best thing that ever happened to me, because they really got me to understand the importance of how I spend my time, how I spend my money. And I want to spend my money on good produce. I also want to spend on supporting farmers and small local food suppliers, not big corporate greedy companies. So I put my money where my mouth is. I know what's important for me and my family, and that is my health. It's not a luxury, it has to be a human right. We really need to change that perception. It's not a movement of the elitist. It shouldn't be.
Yeah, totally agreed. And yeah, I guess that is a sort of a form of activism in a way, is just voting with what you spend on, and supporting the people that you feel align with your values. I guess just to finish then, Camilla, as you know, this interview series is in partnership with our amazing friends at Vivo Barefoot, and this year they've been running a big campaign, and the manifestos are really around embracing your human nature, or like welcoming back the wild, reclaiming the raw. And I just wondered what your take on that would be. Like, what would be your personal advice to kind of rewild ourselves, to reconnect ourselves to nature and to the natural world, to kind of go through this personal transformation, to hopefully lead to a larger planetary transformation?
I suppose I reconnect through my microbiome. I reconnect through feeding myself good food. I know that the power of good food has a huge impact on the power of the way we think. And again, that's it creates an understanding of awareness. So the better I eat, the more awareness I have. That's something that I've really noticed. And that really allows, myself to reconnect to, what's important and the nature within me.
I love that. I mean, I guess eating plant-based food in particular is a physical connection to the environment. I mean, we are physically consuming a different type of consuming than consumerism. We are consuming the environment.
You're consuming the higher intelligence of nature.